everyone, welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology, and with me today is Kevin Palmieri, the founder, CFO, and co-host of Next Level University, a global top 100 self-improvement podcast. There's a famous saying that humans are creatures of habit. While we all find ourselves utilizing patterns of behavior in some aspects of our lives, many of us would also like to believe that we have a high degree of autonomy and free will over our actions. Keen listeners will know that free will itself is a debatable issue in the field of philosophy. But even with that aside, the neuroscientific and psychological research on habituation raises questions about whether we shape our habits or whether they shape us. All right, Kevin, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate you coming on. What do you want to tell the listeners about yourself?
Oh, man, I'm a guy who likes helping people. And for most of my life, I was the type of person who was not very hyper-conscious. I lived unconsciously. I just kind of went through the motions. I don't know why I was doing what I was doing. And eventually it got to the point where I said, you know what? I should live more hyper-consciously to make a more intentional life. I ended up doing that, leaving my job and going full-time into podcasting. And now I get to podcast every day for a living. So I guess that's probably me in a nutshell. That's probably the best way to explain myself.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that just that act of being hyper-conscious is part of being philosophical, right?
I thought you'd like that, Joel.
Yeah,
I thought you'd like that.
Looking at what you're doing and saying, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? Or what is the meaning behind what I'm doing? And really examining that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm really interested to get into it. We're talking about habits. So what is a habit?
To me, a habit is something that you do repeatedly. I would normally say a habit is an exercise that you do daily to achieve a result. But I think many of our habits are just based on unconscious going through the flow. So many of the habits we have, we're not actually basing them on a result. I think we're just basing them on least path of resistance. We're basing them on getting significance. We're basing them on feeling good in the moment. So yeah, it's something that you're repeatedly doing. I think that's probably the best way to describe a habit, because for many of us, if it's unconscious, we don't necessarily have a designation for the result we want.
Yeah. There's a lot in there, and we're going to get into a lot of it as we go along. But I think that's a good start. So why do you think people form habits?
Ooh, I don't know that people actually realize they're forming habits. I think oftentimes their identity kind of decides for them. So this is the way I like to put it. For a long time, I had the habit of turning down any opportunity to show myself to a crowd. Right? So like if I'm in a crowd and somebody says, hey, any questions, raise your hand. I might have a question every time, but I may never raise my hand a single time. Why? My identity is I'm not the type of person who raises my hand in this room. I'm the type of person who is afraid of embarrassment, so I don't want to get rejected here. So I think for many of us, it comes from an identity level. I am the type of person who does this. B, I am not the type of person who does this. And then I think this is a great question. Something that starts off as temporary eventually gets to the point where it seems like it's forever. It seems like it's permanent. And then that habit just kind of becomes who we believe we are in a weird way.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Do you think that that's a false dichotomy, this idea of our self-narrative saying I am either am or am not the type of person that does something?
I think it's just a safety mechanism at the end of the day, really, because, say, I'm sure that probably came from, just me in that example, not wanting to raise my hand. I'm sure that came from pain at some point in my life, pain or perceived pain. So I probably said, you know what, it's not safe for me to do that. Let me identify as the type of person who doesn't do it. I just think that for many of us, we live from a place of our past, and we think that what we're doing in the present is leading to the future, and it is. But one of the reasons many of us are doing what we're doing in the present is because of our past. So I think that's the dichotomy of what we're doing today is not necessarily because of what we did yesterday. It might be because of what we did 15 years ago. We just don't realize it. And that's just like a very interesting thing that I've noticed even about myself. When I got into business, I wasn't not succeeding in business because of something I didn't do yesterday. It was because I didn't uncondition stuff from 10, 15, 20 years ago that are still running me. So I think that's the dichotomy, really.
Yeah. And that's right on. I'm working on my PhD in psychology right now. And one of the classes that I'm taking is talking about recent theories in psychological development. And, the history of psychological development has usually been these sort of antagonistic theories. People either looking at, it's either nature in the form of genetics or in the form of stimulus response, or it's nurture in the form of maturation stage theories, those sorts of things that cause human development. And the new theories that have sort of started to take over have integrated the opposites by saying, well, all of these things play a role in some way, but lots of times, your genes play a much smaller role than you think they do. Like, you are limited by your genes, but your genes have incredible plasticity, and so it's really how you interact with your environment. And they're finding out, well, even your self-talk, like in being an individual, you are a source of your own development. So it's not just what your mom did when you were young or what your teacher told you in high school or whatever. And it goes much beyond just your childhood. All throughout life, we're having experiences with our context, and those are affecting our genes, and those are affecting our own cognitions and how we think about ourselves. And each one plays a little part in who we become. And I think that habits play a big part of that, because like you were just saying, sometimes it's something that we learned a long time ago. Sometimes it's a recent event, but sometimes it can even be a perceived future, right? If we're thinking about how something might be in the future, we might act a certain way. And once you act that way once, it becomes easier and easier to act that way over and over again.
Yeah. Oh, and there also is the side of things like, what do you get rewarded for? If you get rewarded for something, so my wife is a BA. So she's a behavioral analysis. She does behavioral analysis. And we were talking all the time about, like, we have cats, and when we had kittens, she's like, you can't reward that type of behavior because it's going to become a habit. And so that's another interesting thing, is what you're reprimanded for and what you're rewarded for. Those are two different conversations around why people build certain habits as well. I'm sure you know way more about that than I do, but that's just a good perspective to throw out there.
Yeah. I think when people think about the stimulus response sort of stuff, they're always thinking about, they say positive and negative reinforcement, right? And positive reinforcement is like Pavlov's dogs that everybody knows about, right? You feed the dogs learn to salivate when they are expecting food, even before the food comes. And negative reinforcement is really having, something happen in the absence of it. And punishment is an entirely different concept. So there is a lot tied up in there. And most of the empirical psychological research that there is from behavioral scientists. So it does play a big role. What got you interested in habits?
Oh, man. I think for many people, I think myself included, it was lack. So my first habits I can remember practicing were fitness. And again, was that the first one ever? No, but that was what I remember, because the results I had in my life was insecurity because of my size. So I'm 5'4", 5'5" on a good day. I was always the smallest, quote unquote. I was the shortest. I was made fun of for that. And I remember when I found the gym for the first time, I was like, interesting. I cannot alter my height, but I can alter the amount of weight I can lift. Interesting. So the first habit I remember ever practicing, and the first positive association I had with that, was fitness. For the first time in my life, I could directly see this input gets this output. Interesting. Okay, what if I do more of this input? Oh, more results. So for me, that was it. And now it's like, I have a certain result I want out of life, right? I want to be healthy, wealthy, and love. I want to have a great business. I want to impact a bunch of people. Now I realize that, okay, if you, with a high likelihood of understanding, can suggest these are the top 15 habits that would bring me that result, then it's up to you and whether or not you want to do them. So now I track 27 or something, 26 habits a day. if I want to succeed at the level I say, I should be doing these things. If I don't want what I say, I'm obviously not going to do those things. But I think it just creates a roadmap, and I think that's valuable.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy that you had, and it's funny because mine's probably the same. I remember when I was 11, my dad worked out his whole life. So when I was 11, I wanted to work out right away. And it was for a lot of the same reasons as you. All my friends were taller than me. All my friends were bigger than me. So I wanted to get bigger. But I mean, I'm 5'11" now. So it just goes to show, like, a lot of it is relative. A lot of it's self-talk. Some of these things that we perceive as being weaknesses or oddities, it all depends on the context you're in and the people that surround you and those sorts of things. So do people have control over their habit forming abilities?
I like to think so, but I also always preface it with, I am somebody who, my behavior usually changes long before my identity. So I know some people have to change the identity level of who they are before they can start practicing a new behavior. For me, I just kind of start doing something because I know I'll get the result if I do. So I think there's factors there, like, is there accountability built in? Are you more likely to practice a habit if there's accountability from social or community? Okay, cool. What is the direct connection between necessity and the formation of the habit? I think that depends. If you're somebody who something happened in your life and now you're focused on living within a certain amount of money, there's a lot of necessity there for you to focus on a new habit of saving money, not eating out, not going through the drive-through, not spending unnecessarily. So I would say, I think we do have a high level of opportunity to influence our habits. Maybe not necessarily the formation in the beginning, but when you have the awareness of the results the habit is the result it's creating for you, I would say the ability to influence it is very high. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I think it again is very subjective. I think it will change a lot person to person, but also situation to situation, right? I think that some people might naturally have a better ability harnessing the ability to create habits more so than other people. But then even within our lives, right? It might be easier for me to form the habit of fitness than somebody else, but it might be harder for me to form a different type of habit.
Yeah.
Again, based on any of those factors, whether it was, a pre-existing history or some genetic capability or an interaction with somebody. I think that, it might be, if you looked at the whole picture, there might be quite a bit of variability with people. But what you said is important. I think what makes habits kind of tricky is that it's almost like, well, a quote that I always like is from the movie Inception when he's teaching a girl how to build dreams, right? And he says, the funny thing about a dream is you always end up in the middle of it. Think about it. How did you get here? Where did this come from, right? Habits are kind of the same way. I don't think, like you said, there's not a whole lot of intentionality in most cases. A lot of people just one day realize, oh, this is something that I do over and over again. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But habits tend to sneak up on you a little bit.
Yeah. I don't think that they start off intentionally. I think they start off kind of just by default. It's almost like, what is the most accessible behavior? I mean, the odds of that becoming a habit are probably pretty high if you think about it, right? I wouldn't argue. I would suggest maybe that somebody who, it's a good analogy, somebody who walks to school is probably have a higher likelihood of walking in the future. Like, I didn't have to walk to school. I used to get a ride. So what does that say about me? I don't know. Maybe does that suggest that I might not want to live in the city because I'm the type of person who drives everywhere and I don't walk? Somebody who is used to walking, they have that habit. They live in the city. I don't know. I just think for many people, it's like the lowest barrier to the entry becomes the habit. I think that's really, really probably part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's why this question is sort of hard. Thinking about, do people have control over their habit forming abilities? Because I think the control part in habits, the beginning is very important. It's kind of like rolling a snowball downhill, right? So if the way that if the way you're normally made aware of habits is in the middle of them, then that snowball's already rolling halfway down the hill and you're trying to stop it, right? So this ability to control your habit forming ability is difficult. And there's some psychological research behind it. And I've used some of the tips and tricks to help me with some things, and they do work. But the thing is, you have to be very consciously aware of it. The very first time you go to do something, you have to say, okay, this is the reason that I'm doing it. This is what I'm going to do in the future. This is why I'm doing it. You basically have to lay out your rationale to kind of program your brain to say, okay, this is the way I'm going to do it. But if you don't do that the first time and you form a bad habit, or you have a shortcut or something, trying to go back and adjust that behavior is very difficult.
Yeah, I think if there's a level of pain, I think pain creates a reminder. Maybe not necessarily just pain, but so I'll be very transparent. I had an addiction to pornography for, I don't know, from 16 to 26, maybe 25, 26. And the only time I ever realized how bad of a habit it was, and it was a habit worth breaking, was when there was pain associated with relationships I had. Then it was like, oh my goodness, the contrast of, wait, the last time I didn't do this was X long ago, but I never felt any sort of necessity or pain. Now I have a ton of pain. Interesting. Is this habit worth keeping based on the amount of pain I'm dealing with right now? Yes or no? No. Okay. So it kind of raised it from unconscious to like hyper-conscious. This needs to change as soon as humanly possible. All my attention goes to putting out this one fire. I don't know if that lands with this, but like that happened to me, and it makes a lot of sense now looking back.
Yeah, and again, there's some science behind that, where it's cognitive dissonance is the jargon word for it, where you move through your life and you have certain beliefs, certain behaviors, certain things that are just part of your identity. And then inevitably, everybody at some point during their life, in some situation, comes across a piece of information that contradicts your beliefs, or is at odds with your actions, or really confronts you with the reality that something in your identity is lacking in some way. And cognitive dissonance refers to how people make decisions in that situation. And really, there's only one of two options, right? Option number one is to be confronted with it and say, oh, this is not, this is something that I move through life with, but it's actually a maladaptive behavior. So the right thing to do is to take this information that I'm getting and, assess it based, along with the stuff that I already know, and then integrate them and come up with a new solution of how to move forward. The other way of addressing it, and this is the more common way by far, is to look at the new information and rationalize a reason why it's not right, and then continue with your old behaviors. Because that's the power of habits. The power of habits is the ability to look at new information that is correct and be able to rationalize your way out of it being correct. And we see this a lot. A prime example nowadays is political polarization, right? You see people on the left and the right, and there's an endless number of stories going both ways, to the left and to the right, where something's just refuted, just flat out. This is false. This is a lie. And whichever side you're on, they'll find a way to say, well, no, actually, it's fake news of one kind or another, or it was just a biased reporting or something. So yeah, this idea of cognitive dissonance, of looking at something, this new information that's staring you in the face, saying that what you've been doing is wrong. It's a very powerful thing to try to go up against.
I think an interesting thing, this is an interesting perspective. How do you justify a positive habit? I think if you can get to that level, so The example I use is Mel Robbins has a book called The 5-Second Rule. When you're thinking about doing something, you count backwards from 5. What I started doing, because 5 seconds just wasn't long enough for me, and here's why. It wasn't a long enough amount of time for me to reverse engineer the regret I would feel if I didn't do something. So I'll be in bed, my alarm clock will go off, I count back from 10. 10, 9. I've never not gotten up by 1, but that's because in my mind, I'm literally thinking to myself, you've never missed. You've never missed. You've never missed. Don't miss today. You've never missed. I think there's something about that streak that helps us justify doing it because, I mean, it's kind of the sunk cost bias of, I've done this 99 times. I don't want to start over again. Let me just do it again. So I think that's the ultimate goal is if you can get to the point where you justify your positive habits, that's a really good place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Is willpower an important part of forming good habits and breaking bad ones?
Yeah, 100%. I think so because it's not easy and you have zero momentum in the beginning and you're kind of unlearning something and learning something new. So I think you kind of have to, and just from my experience, you have to say, hey, this is probably going to suck. This isn't going to be easy. I don't have any momentum yet. I haven't formed any new behaviors yet. I don't have any understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think in the beginning, willpower is a huge piece of it because it's almost like you against yourself. It's you against yourself. It's you against momentum. It's you against potential pleasure. So yeah, I would say yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of the most recent science. I'll get your thoughts on it. What a lot of the most recent studies that have come out have said, when they examine people with bad habits versus people with good habits, they find that there actually isn't much difference in their willpower, which willpower being defined as if you put somebody in a situation with a temptation, do they give in? What they found is the most successful people who stick with good habits, they don't tend to choose the good habits so much as remove bad habits from their context, remove temptations from their context. So it's the sort of thing where if I say I'm not going to eat any donuts, right, which is the situation I'm currently in, I'm saying I'm not going to eat any donuts, right? If I don't buy any donuts, there's no donuts in my house, and I go, oh, well, I'd have to get in my car and I'd have to drive and I have to get one. And then, I'm less likely to do it than if, I keep donuts in my house because my wife wants to eat them, right? And then they're just sitting there. And I go, oh, well, I'm not going to eat them. The science says, no, there's a good chance that it doesn't matter if you have a lot of good habits or a lot of bad habits. There's a good chance that you're going to eat them if they're there. What do you think about that?
I think that's very interesting. I was going to ask you, is there any, I would say, what is that? I don't know. It's a hard question. How does the goal affect the habit? So I did a bodybuilding show in my early 20s. And yeah, well, I'd like to say I just got rid of all the food that I wanted to eat but wasn't allowed to. I mean, I went through the 4th of July. I went through my birthday. I went through 2 weddings and my girlfriend's birthday at the time. And I was offered cake all the time and I was offered everything. And I always said no. So it's almost like, I would be curious to know how they'd measure for that if
and I think
equated the same.
Yeah. And I think that that's where semantics comes in a little bit because, with any empirical study, anything that you can call hard science, a very important part about it is defining the variables, having a very specific meaning for what you're talking about. And so, willpower defined in one way in these studies perhaps is very narrow. But there's a related concept that is similar to what you're talking about that they call grit, right? Grit, this ability to stick with something in the face of adversity. How that's different from willpower, that's outside of my area of expertise, so I'm not sure. Maybe they're technically the same thing. And this is part of why I have a philosophy show, is because just the human instinct to categorize and to look at language and these different buckets that we create for things and to pick them apart and say, well, do they actually exist? Or are these just, things that we use to try to make things neat and orderly? Is an interesting part of it. But yeah, that's a really cool question is the goal, right? Because in my case, well, education's a good one, right? I am not getting my degree for any particular reason. I have a great job as a manager of a manufacturing plant that pays me a lot more money than I would get with any job with a PhD in psychology. But when I was in the Army made the college cheap. So I just went and I just keep going. It's a habit now, right? One class ends, I just take another one. But so now I'm at the doctorate level. Every once in a while, right, you run across a class that's really hard, or a class that maybe you're not as interested in, or maybe you have a lot of stuff going on in your personal life that you could be doing instead of investing the time in the class. But there's always that thing in your mind, well, the PhD is right there. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to make some sacrifices of time or of money or of sleep or whatever it is in order to obtain that goal. So yeah, I think that that's a really interesting thought, is how goal-directed behavior plays into the concept of willpower and the concept of habits.
Yeah. I always wonder, just from like a scientific standpoint, it's like, I don't know what the studies are, but it makes me wonder, if there's a donut in front of you, you don't have any goal for weight loss, the likelihood of you eating the donut has to be higher, I would assume.
Yeah, I would think so.
You know what I mean? So that just always makes me curious of like, what are the actual not ramifications, but like, what are the actual outlines and specificities of these things? It just makes me wonder.
Yeah. And the example that you brought up of, the guy saying to count to 5, I think that counting to 5, or in your case, 10, right? Giving yourself that extra time. That's your way of giving your brain a goal real quick, right? It's your way of saying, I did it with donuts, right? I went to work and there was 6 donuts for Valentine's Day, right? Day 1 of my diet. So on day 1, it'd be different. If I was in the middle of it, you might say, but day 1, it's like, oh, well, I could just push the whole thing back a day. I have a donut now, right? But you have to keep telling myself a story, right? And giving myself a goal, saying, listen, donuts are always going to be there. They're not going anywhere. I can have a donut anytime I want. Just because there's a bunch of them here right now doesn't mean I need to eat one, right?
Yeah.
That's a goal. You're keeping in mind, okay, well, here's my end goal. These are all the reasons why I should or shouldn't do this thing in order to get to that goal. So yeah, goal-directed behavior, that's really interesting. And I'm not up to par on any of the studies regarding it, but now I'm going to look into it some because I'm curious.
Right on.
So people can form habits unintentionally, but can they maintain them without being aware of them?
I don't know. I think they can be unaware of the results. Oh, that's a great question. It's a
tricky one because
it's a tough one.
Yeah, we talked about earlier how usually you're aware of a habit in the middle of it. So usually that forming the habit is mostly unintentional, and that's the way people end up with a lot of bad habits. But this idea of, could you go through your whole life with a habit of some kind and just maintain it, have it going on and not be aware of it? To me, it almost seems like at some point in your life, good habit or bad habit, you'd have to become aware of it, but I'm not sure.
You'd think. One of my favorite questions is, how do you know you're sleeping? When you wake up. The only time you really know you're sleeping, at least for me, like, I'm not one who can diagnose, oh, I'm dreaming. I don't really know that. The only time I ever know I'm sleeping is when I wake up. Okay, how about this? I know many people who say, and I probably said it in this episode, like, but, specifically. Do they know they're saying that, or is that just unconscious? And if they never came across a speaker or somebody who had focused on unlearning that behavior, would that ever get brought to their attention? I don't know. So now with that example, I might say that you could live your entire life completely unconscious of a habit.
Yeah. No, as a podcaster, I run up against that a lot. Like, I'm terrible at it. I'm always going, and when I'm doing the podcast, like right now, I don't realize it. But after I'm going through and I'm mixing it and later on and stuff, I go, oh man, I can't even listen to myself. I'm just stuttering through everything. So yeah, I think that, there is a lot of habits that there probably is a lot of habits that all of us maintain throughout our lives that we're unaware of.
Yeah.
Can a habit be good and bad at the same time?
Yes, I think you can really, and again, anytime I say yes or no, that's just my assumption of the feeling. You can really only prioritize or optimize for one thing at a time. So I think of it like, could exercise be a bad habit? Yes, exercise could be a bad habit if I'm also not upkeeping the habit of spending time with my partner. So I think too much of something can be bad if it leads to not enough of something else. So yeah, I would say, especially if it's a time-based habit, 100%.
Yeah, this is, they have a whole sort of psychological model of human development that revolves, it's called selection, optimization, and compensation. So it's the view that as you're going through life, you select goals to shoot for, and then you optimize your life for those goals. So you take your resources, and by resources, I mean time, effort, energy, money, everything, right? And just try to decide how much of each one you're going to devote to this thing. And then at some point, you will something will happen. You'll either reach the sort of pinnacle of that thing, or due to age or to some other condition, you won't be able to progress any farther. So after the optimization stage, there's compensation, which is saying, okay, well, instead of devoting my resources to getting better at this thing, how much of my resources now am I going to devote to maintaining how good I am at this thing? So the language it uses is pretty interesting there. But yeah, I think fitness is a really good one, right? I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with, because how do you find the line, right? Everybody thinks of fitness as being a good hobby, right? A good habit. Yeah, I'm gonna get in shape. Okay, well, you get in shape, but then maybe you start just crash dieting, or you start taking some steroids, or you start engaging in behaviors, unhealthy behaviors, in order to pursue this fitness goal. Do you have any sort of advice or insight into how you draw the line between when a good habit is actually becoming a bad habit?
Oh, man. Yeah, I think maybe the result of the habit is far beyond the result that you started the habit for, is a potential way to look at it. It's actually taking from your cup and not pouring into your cup any longer. That's another interesting perspective to have. And I would just say, is the habit overall destructive versus constructive? Even the fitness example, when I did a bodybuilding show, yeah, it might seem like I was doing something great, but I was definitely not eating enough. I was over exercising. My hormones were all over the place. I was not dehydrated because I was drinking a lot of water, but I did some damage to my body for sure. That took me years and years to recover from. I didn't know it because that was the goal I set. So yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking back to earlier in the conversation that we just had, and I'm wondering if a lot of times when the good habits turn into bad habits is when you lose sight of what your goal might have been. Because I think that, I know it's happened to me, right? It happens to everybody. We're all human. Where we set a goal, or maybe we don't even have a goal. Maybe we just start with a good habit, like fitness, right? And then it's almost like you don't realize it, but you don't think that there can be too much of a good thing. And so you keep going and going. And if you don't have a goal, you don't have a point at which you can say, oh, okay, I'm there. I've arrived. I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. Now I can move from that optimization to the compensation, and then start, working on something else, or looking at something a different way. then you just kind of end up in this endless cycle of trying to master something. And really the idea of mastering something is false. It's elusive, right? We never truly master anything. So you can be in this constant pursuit of fitness, but if you don't have a goal, you don't have an idea of what fitness means to you, you might be stuck endlessly chasing, and it might lead you into some disruptive behaviors.
I wonder, and this is theory, I believe you know the term better than I. What's the difference between trying to accomplish something to fill an internal void and trying to accomplish something to create an external result? That's an interesting thing, like based on that question. If you think of somebody who they have something internal where if I look a certain way, I will get love, I'll get significance, I'll get certainty, whatever it may be, versus I'm trying to be the best fitness model on the planet. Like those are just two different intentions that could, I guess, achieve a similar result based on different positive and negatives, potentially.
Yeah. No, I think that definitely, again, and then again, that goal-oriented behavior. Now you've really got me on goals. I'm going to have to do a whole episode on goals. But it comes back to sort of your initial motivation for achieving a goal. So even if you could have 10 people with the same goal, but they're all going to have different motivations for it. So like education again, right? I think the majority of people going to school are going to school to get a piece of paper that will get them a job. Whereas that's not at all my motivation, right? I really don't care about the piece of paper so much. Like I just like learning stuff. And so I keep going just to learn more things. But yeah, you might have a lot of, and some people, the big joke in psychology, right, is that everybody takes psychology to try to fix their own problems. So, yeah, and there could be any number. You might be trying to fix your own problems. You might be trying to get a job. You might just enjoy the pursuit of learning. You might be applying it to your philosophy podcast on the side, whatever the case is. Yeah, I think that there's a good chance that your initial motivation might have a large bearing on whether or not your good habit's going to turn into a bad habit.
Yeah, that's deep. It's very interesting.
What can we tell about habits from looking at modern society?
Ooh, man. As much as it pains me, I think we can tell that most people are taking the path of least resistance. Just based on, well, I'll say this. I would put that as, that's part of it. I also think the quality of your habits are directly connected to your awareness around them. So if you think of somebody who, let's just say they have a habit of taking the newest health supplement, like this is guaranteed to help you lose 50 pounds in 50 weeks, whatever it is. The problem with a lot of those things is the only reason they're successful is because they play to the lack of awareness around the individual. Where if you're somebody who knows a ton about fitness, you would never get bought into that. You couldn't, because your awareness is high enough to know that's not how it works. So I think it's a mix of those things where the path of least resistance is usually the thing that we're being advertised. And if you don't have awareness, it seems like the silver bullet. If you do have awareness, it seems like the dumbest thing you've ever seen in your life. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy where I might see something in fitness and say, that's seriously the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Based on my awareness, somebody else might see it and say, wow, that's the thing I've been waiting for my entire life, based on their awareness. So that awareness and the path of least resistance, I think go hand in hand, or not necessarily hand in hand, but they have a relationship, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because the path of least resistance, that's an evolutionarily selected for behavior, right? In human development, we call it adaptation, right? Adaptation doesn't necessarily espouse a good or a bad behavior. It's just something that you do in order to survive or thrive. And sometimes that can take the form of bad habits, right? You see, something like 45% of adults are obese, right? So eating, and especially eating certain types of food, becomes a bad habit for a lot of adults. But if you look at, evolutionarily, it really makes a lot of sense to just scarf up as many calories as you can as often as you can, right?
Yeah.
So I think the path of least resistance is a good one, because the path of least resistance, both physically, but also in your brain, right? The way that your brain works, as you form new connections, your axons and your dendrites, everything's connecting in there. Once it connects, it's easier to connect that same way. And then those pathways become myelinated, insulated, so the signals move faster. And so, it's really the path of least resistance in the electrical current of your brain, is going to, so it really is that idea. And that's what we talked about at the beginning of the show is, it's important to get stuff right early, because if you don't get it right early, then it's really hard to break those pathways. Yeah. But awareness, that's another good one as well. I think that's a big part of why I live my life the way I do is because I like to peek behind the curtain of things. So, I remember, I think the biggest one that I found it with was music. When I had a band and then the band broke up and I wanted to keep making music. So I taught myself all the instruments and made a recording studio. When you start learning how music's recorded in a studio and you start looking at it, all of a sudden you go, oh, this thing that just seems magical to a lay person, all of a sudden you start to see what actually goes on behind the scenes, and it demystifies it a bit.
Yeah.
Same thing with fitness, like you were saying, you look at the supplements and you go, okay, you have people like me on the other side, on the marketing side, right? Marketing is essentially your stimulus response. It's Pavlov's dogs, right? Mm-hmm. Your marketing person just trying to say, what can we put on a billboard or on TV or on this to make somebody salivate, right? To make somebody want this thing, to try to encourage them to think that it does something that it might not. And I think that, so awareness, being able to just, move beyond a lay person. And I don't think it takes much. If you know 10% of a field or 15% of a field, that's probably enough knowledge to not let those things sway you one way or another, really.
Yeah, I would say so. It's like I've worked with podcasters who have 50 episodes, and I'm like, you can coach most podcasters, right? Because most podcasters are well under 50 and they haven't got to where you are. Like, it's that level of, you might not know everything I know from 1,200 episodes, but you know enough to help somebody who percentage-wise is closer to your end of the spectrum. So yeah, to your point, there's an awareness that comes with it that I think it's almost like a fundamental awareness. There's like one fundamental awareness that umbrellas into others that it's like, that can't be right,
Yeah. No, I think I saw a statistic one time that said 90% of podcasts don't make it to 10 episodes, right? And so you're right. If you've done 50 episodes, you know a lot. You know more than 90% of podcasters at least, right? But I think that's then you end up with then there's this imposter syndrome, right? Like, well, I don't really know anything about this, right? And this goes all the way back to the greatest philosopher, right? Well, I know nothing about anything, right? And I think that is true. The more you learn about things, the easier it is to say, well, actually, I really don't know anything about this. Yeah. And I think that is a sign of maturity, but it can also be a roadblock at sometimes if you're not utilizing the knowledge that you have gained or the behaviors that you have put in place. Yeah. So
it's important to make it a habit to do, like, to get outside of your comfort zone and to face that stuff too.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's a big part too.
So what is some good advice about managing habits? This is kind of what I didn't even mention your podcast. So
no worries.
I want to go ahead and plug your show and tell us, give us some good advice about habits.
Yeah. So our show is, it's called Next Level University. We do 7 episodes a week. So talk about the power of doing something every day, getting a little bit better. And our philosophy really is holistic self-improvement for dream chasers. So I talk about health a lot. We talk about wealth. We talk about life. We talk about love. And if you break it down, it's the habits underneath every single one of those things. So my wife and I have a habit every night before we go to bed. We play the gratitude game. What's one thing I'm grateful for about her, and vice versa. That one habit that takes all of 3 minutes has exponentially helped our relationship. It's been amazing. So what I would say when it comes to habits is, number one, make it unreasonably sustainable. Unreasonably sustainable in the beginning. The path, you want to make a good habit, create the one with the path of lowest resistance, not least resistance necessarily, but lowest. That's part one. Number two, try to do it in a well-rounded manner. So create a habit under health, create a habit under wealth, create a habit under love. Those three things are really the arenas of life. And a lot of us are getting really good at one arena, but we wonder why the other ones are lagging behind. We're not using the habits from the real world in our relationship, or from the real world to wealth. And a lot of things are being left behind because of that. And then I would say the third biggest thing is try to leverage the power of human accountability. If you have people around you that you can kind of use as accountability for your habits, I'm willing to bet you'll get more done just because of the necessity. Or I have something I call the $100 habit. I have my $100 bill here that I show off. I told my wife, I said, hey babe, I need you to do me a favor. She said, what? And I said, if I don't go to the gym every day for the next 7 days, I need you to rip this $100 bill up in front of me. And she said, Kev, I'm not going to do that. And I said, I'm not going to fail you, I promise. And eventually she said she would. The reason I did that is because, number one, I didn't want to let her down. Number two, I value money. I didn't want to lose $100. And number three, and we kind of talked about this, I didn't want to set the precedent that I failed that. I had like that fail safe of, look, it's not even the $100. If I see my wife rip it up one time, it never leaves. That's always there. That's there forever, that I couldn't accomplish what I said. So I tried to bring that in as well. So that's another thought, is create some sort of like an agreement with yourself. If I don't accomplish what I want, I'm going to blank, whether it's a positive or potentially negative.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fantastic tips.
I appreciate it.
It's been really great having you on. Is there any final words you want to have, or do you think we covered things pretty well?
We definitely covered things very well. Last thing I would say is the biggest difference between who you are today and who you want to become in the future is your habits. It's very appropriate based on the fact that we're talking about that. But yeah, I don't believe there's any such thing as maintenance. I think as humans, we're either improving or we're going backwards, unfortunately. So make sure that the things that you're doing every day are bringing you towards the future that you want, not towards a future that you're uncertain of what you're going to get. That's the last thing I would say.
Fantastic. All right. This was an awesome episode. Thanks for being on, Kevin. And until next time.